Welcome to this message of encouragement. Today I'm going to be talking about breaking alternate futures that we create when we deviate from God's perfect plan for our life. But before I get started, I always like to ask those of you who are watching to please pray for our nation's leaders, to pray for other people. There are so many needs out in the world. And also I'd like to ask you, please pray for me. I haven't done a video in about a month. I'm having some health issues, and I very much desire your prayers, and I need a healing touch from the Lord. When I was doing my Bible study the other night, I started to think, you may have never heard the term alternate futures, but in fact we do create alternate futures for ourselves anytime that we're not following God's will for our life. He has a perfect plan for our life, and anytime we go out on our own and try to fix things on our own, we actually, make a mess of things. And once we start to make a mess of things, we're actually creating a future for ourselves that was never meant to be. Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give hope and a future." So, here we're being told, God is letting us know that He has plans for us to prosper, plans that would never harm us, or, He wants to keep us out of harm's way. And He also wants to give us a future filled with hope. We must follow God's instructions and directions in order to live the life we've been called to live. If we deviate from God's plan in any way, we inevitably, as I was just talking about, we inevitably create that alternate future where things quickly turn into a disaster. When we deviate from God's perfect plan, we continuously jump from one alternate future to another, after another, and after another. And again, what do I mean by alternate future? One example, if you think of a young pregnant woman, the Lord already has that child's life planned out from the birth through going to school, getting married, having its own family, all the way up to the end of its life. God has a perfect plan for that child. Now, the alternate future is created when, say, the mother goes and has an abortion. That stops God's perfect plan. That goes into an alternate future that was never meant to be. Never meant to be. And another example of someone creating an alternate future for themselves, just think of, say, a young man who's been, or a young lady who's been raised within the church. They're living a blessed life, and they just all, because of different turn of events, maybe different friends that they hang around with, they decide and choose that they want to enter into the world of drugs and alcohol. That creates an alternate future for their selves, which is, disastrous, and then they can never figure out why they're not living a prosperous, good life, or living in God's will. Just because they stepped out on their own and stepped into creating an alternate future for themselves instead of staying in the future, the plan that God has for their future. Anytime that someone is living a life of misery, that person is actually living in an alternate future that they have created and not living in the will of God. Well, why does God give us, explicit instructions? Well, God does this because, God is calling us to obedience and a relationship with Him through obedience. God gives us specific, instructions because we make a mess of things when we try to do anything on our own. We just create one mess after another after another. And also, when we deviate from God's plan, we are in fact turning our back upon God, and we're deciding, hey, we're going to do this our way. We don't need God, and we don't even want God in our plan. And so, that creates an alternate future, which is a disaster. Society has also geared us to be independent and separate from God. People are often told, you need to do this and you need to do that, or you're the only one who can straighten you out. And one of my favorite is, you're the only one who can fix you. And I know a lot of people who've actually tried through the years, after making a mess or creating their alternate future, then they were trying to, fix their self, and they found that they could not fix their self. Nobody can fix their self. Only God. Our openness to allow God to work in our life. Only God can fix us or straighten our life back out. We definitely can't do it on our own. And listening to statements that society throws at us, like you're the only one who can help yourself, that in a sense helps us to create a habit of stepping out on our own, and we end up this is how we end up creating these alternate futures, by getting into that habit of stepping out on our own and acting independently and separate from God, choosing to do things our own way. In the Old Testament, God is continuously giving instructions to the who He wants to give instructions to, for the things that He wants to do, for the what, the when, and the where, how He wants things done, and so forth. He's constantly giving explicit instructions. And those who are open to these instructions, or who are open to the will of God, are successful in, delivering His message. Or like Noah, building the ark. There was success there because Noah was open and willing, to listen to God. God has a perfect plan for your life, but people don't have enough faith to follow God's plan sometimes, nor the patience to wait for God's directions and instructions. Here again, we end up creating an alternate future for ourselves. Some people set out to create their own perfect life, and they can't understand why they're never happy and they're never satisfied within their life. Well, you can't make changes to God's perfect plan and expect to be happy or successful. Once again, people need to be willing to understand and willing to receive directions from God in order to carry out His plan of direction for their life. God's plan of direction sometimes is to warn us. God's plan of direction is sometimes to protect us. But no matter what, God has a perfect plan for our life. No matter what, God has a perfect plan for our life. If you look back and you see that your life is one disaster after another, you'll find that in all things, you made one bad choice after another. In other words, if your life is in a mess, it's because you created that mess. You created your own alternate futures by, deviating from God's perfect plan. By making, your choices, your decisions that, hey, I'm going to do this my way, or I'm going to do that my way. Looking back upon my life, I have suffered too, one disaster after another, after another, after another, because I spent a lifetime trying to build the perfect life for me, and in trying to fix things on my own. And with each time, this was not God's plan for my life, and this explains why nothing ever worked out. It explains, why I, couldn't figure out why I wasn't happy, why I was miserable. Well, I was so busy trying to create, what I thought was the right life for me. I was, in fact, creating the wrong life for me, completely wrong, that was not a good fit for me. In closing, Proverbs chapter 23, verse 18 says, "Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off." So we're being told here that, no matter what disasters we create in our life, that each minute or each moment is another opportunity for God to turn things around in our life. That we will not be left without hope, and that He still can work that perfect future, back into our life. It may take a little longer. That's what we get caught up in when we make a mess of things. God has to put things back into place. God has to put different people back into place to help us. So a lot of times, it seems like it may take a long time to get your life straightened out, for God, to to get your life straightened out. But it's because we have created such a disaster of our life. Like I said, God has to, fit things back in like a puzzle, to bring us back into that perfect life. And it does take time. The more we mess it up, the more time it's going to take to get our life straightened out. But God will bring us back into that perfect plan. I hope that this message has been encouraging to you. I hope that it's been uplifting to you in some way. My prayer is that that it helps you to stop deviating from God's plan, to listen for His instructions, to wait for His instructions in all matters. Because like I said, anything that we do or we try to do on our own, we do nothing but make one mess after another, and just continuously create alternate futures for ourselves. Like we shouldn't be going down this path, or we shouldn't be going down that path. They are alternate futures. This is what I'm calling them. The Bible doesn't say that, but in all reality, we actually just create alternate futures for ourselves anytime we deviate from God's plan. So my prayer is that that you listen for God, you read your Bible, you study, you wait for those instructions and directions from God to stay in the perfect will of God and His perfect plan for your life. God bless. Stay safe.